I'm on another Zoom meeting.
We'll start in about 3 minutes. Thank you all for coming. All right, I am going to start. Good afternoon. It's 12:30. Welcome to the Nurses Symposium 2020. I am so happy that you are all here today. We have some participants actually registering as we're just starting, so I'm stalling just a little bit for people to catch up with us. I just want to go over a few things before we start. My name is Jennifer Connolly, and I am the proud SELPA coordinator for Santa Barbara County. I am here with a wonderful team of nurses that have put together this presentation for you all today. And I just really want to thank our committee, who has put a lot of thought into how to organize this new virtual training. Normally we do this in person, and it's just very different to be talking to yourself on a Zoom. So thank you all for coming today. Those of you that are from out of the area, we welcome you. And those of you that are from the area, we welcome you as well. And as a daughter of a nurse, I just want to thank you all for your amazing work. The last however many years you have been working in the field. My mother was a nurse, and I just highly respect your trade and the things that you do for our students and our communities. We just really sincerely thank you. So happy Nurses Day, which I know was last week, but happy Nurses Day. Just a few reminders for our Zoom today. If you have not been on Zoom before, I have all of you muted. So if you are not muted, if you could please mute yourself through the training unless we call on you to speak. So you'll notice on the far, I believe it's my left, there's a little microphone. And if there's not a red slash through it, then that means you are not muted. And if you're having conversations where you are, we will be able to hear them. So I just want to give you the courtesy to have privacy for that. Secondly, I see most of you are not choosing to use video today, and that is absolutely fine. If you want to use video, you're welcome to just click that little video camera, and that will take off the red slash, and then we'll see your beautiful faces in the camera. Thirdly, we are going to be using the chat box a lot today. So if you've never used chat before, there are 3 little dots to the far right of your toolbar. And at the very top of that, if you click that, it'll say chat. And I've already written a hello and welcome to all of you in the chat. So if you don't mind opening your chat, that would be fantastic. Today, we're going to use the chat for conversations and for topic questions. So I really welcome you to please give your input and put your questions in those chat boxes, in that chat box, and we will definitely monitor that box throughout the training. Lastly, this training is being recorded. So we are going to be saving this training, and we will be putting it on our SELPA website in some location. We're still working on that at this time. So whatever is said, either verbally like I am doing right now, or in the chat, will be saved forever and be viewed by our community at large. So just keep that in mind when you're making comments or you're unmuting yourself and you're speaking, because those comments will be recorded. Again, I just want to thank all of you very, very much for being here. I highly respect the work that you do, and I just want to welcome you. I have a partner in crime here. I don't want to say in crime, but a wonderful partner, Debbie Geiger, who is here from Santa Barbara County Education Office. And I would like to welcome her to introduce our agenda for today. Debbie, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you, Jennifer. Welcome, everybody, and happy Nurses Day, a week late. As Jennifer said, we value you so much. So thank you, nurses, for all that you do for our students and our community. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Our agenda today is simple. We are thrilled to have California Department of Public Health here to update us on immunizations. Following our presentation, we will have a question and answer time. Please, as Jennifer said, put all questions in the chat, and Jennifer will read them after the presentation. And when the question and answer time concludes, we will have a roundtable discussion time, and then we will end at 2:30. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our guest from California Department of Public Health. Adriana Almaguer, Public Health Program Coordinator. Paige Batson, Community Health Deputy Director. Stephen Van Tyne, Educational Consultant, California Department of Public Health Immunization Branch. Amber Christensen, Clinical and Policy Support Section, California Department of Public Health Immunization Branch. And Dr. Robert Schechter, Chief, Clinical and Policy Support Section, California Department of Public Health Immunization Branch. Thank you so much for joining us. It is an honor to have you here with us today.
And if you could unmute yourself so that we can hear your voice, that would be fantastic.
Hi, this is Amber Christensen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for having us on the call today. Today, we wanted to do a brief recap of the K through 12 immunization requirements and highlight some of the changes that went into effect at the beginning of this school year, and highlight some of the materials that you might find helpful on our website at shotsforschool.org. And also go through some questions we've been receiving about the requirements over the past year that have come in from schools and health departments and other stakeholders. And then we'll cover the medical exemption requirements specifically and what are some upcoming changes to the medical exemption requirements. So this table should look familiar. This is the new K through 12 admission table. And one of the main goals of making changes to the requirements was to get them in sync with the national dosing recommendations. So as some of you may recall, in particular, the hepatitis B, MMR, and varicella vaccine requirements had some age restrictions to them. And so for the most part, we've been able to remove those age restrictions and make the requirements uniform across the grades. So if a student is in admission in any grade, they're required to have all of the doses in this top row, this K through 12 admission row. And then if a student is admitted at grades 7 through 12, they need to meet all the K through 12 admission requirements plus a dose of Tdap. So sometimes we get questions about students coming in at these later grades and what should the school be checking for. So our school guide has some notes that help explain that as well. And then, of course, for 7th grade advancement, now schools are checking for 1 Tdap and 2 varicella doses. And also in this table, there are several footnotes. And just to point out a few, the requirements now specify that a 4-day grace period is okay. So if a dose was given 4 fewer days before the minimum required age, that dose is valid. So that's in one of the footnotes now. It specifies that the requirements do include transfer students. So if that could be one way that some students who were already in school before the new requirements went into place in 2019, that if they transfer, then they can get caught up. For example, if they only had 1 MMR dose and that was all they needed at the time, if they transfer, then they would need 2 doses. So that's one way to help get some of those students caught up a little faster. And then there's also a footnote that refers to the language in state law that in effect says 3 doses of hepatitis B vaccine are not required at entry to 7th grade. And that's something that we can't change through regulation. It would require a legislative fix. Next slide. And then for the conditional admission schedule, so if a student is a little bit behind schedule and they have a few doses to go before the start of school and they're not yet due for those next doses, they can be admitted conditionally. And in the schedule, we have a handful of changes to the time intervals based on recent changes to the national recommendations. Just a quick note that the footnotes give guidance on the final doses for polio and DTaP in particular. And in footnote 2, it shows that there should be at least 6 months between the second and third doses, when the third dose is the final dose in the DTaP series. And some folks have pointed out that this is the same for polio as well, and that occasionally students are referred to the clinic too soon for their third and final dose of polio. So we don't have that footnote in regulation, but we did add it to the school guide. So hopefully that will help with parents not being referred to the clinic too soon. Next slide. So in the next few slides, we'd like to take you through some of the frequently used materials that are available on Shots for School. And these materials are for various audiences, for doctors, schools, childcare facilities, and parents. So on the upper left-hand side, we have some quick links to materials. In the middle, we have links for annual reporting, and those will remain on the homepage here. On the far right, we have some resources related to the new requirements, both the 2019 requirements and the upcoming medical exemption changes. Next slide. So at the top of all the pages on Shots for School, we have different tabs. So under the Laws tab, there are several sets of FAQs. There's a set related to the new requirements. There's one related to medical exemptions, one related to conditional admission. So, and on the new regulations set, there's also the webinar from 2019 that goes over the changes to the regulations. And we do add questions or clarifications based on feedback we receive from schools and health departments and other stakeholders. So for updates. Next slide. And then under the K through 12 tab, on the left-hand side, there's a section called Tools for Schools. And this includes materials like the K through 12 school guide, which is a condensed version of the regulations. And we do occasionally make some clarifications in that school guide. So please double check and make sure you have the latest version. There's also a template letter for children with missing doses. So schools will often use this to let parents know what doses are missing and when they're due. So ideally parents can get updated records back to the school so the child is not excluded. And this notice of immunizations and needed letter has been translated into several languages. Next slide. Then also under the Laws tab, we have, on the left-hand side, there's a section called Handbook, Records, and Materials. And this includes the California Immunization Handbook, also known as the Blue Book. And it has basics about how to determine if the requirements are met, criteria for exemption, and information about other special circumstances. So that's a helpful reference book for schools. And it has been updated with the new requirements and has links to various resources at the end. So sometimes I get questions about the requirements and screenshots of references from the handbook that are a bit outdated. So I definitely encourage you to use the most recent version, which is the 10th edition. And then we also have the updated Blue card, available here, and that you can order hard copies from your local health department.
Can you
And
sit?
it's also available
Mama,
as a
sit.
fillable PDF.
Oh.
Next slide.
Before you move on, we hear someone
Yeah.
making noise. If someone could mute, whoever's not muted, if you don't mind muting yourself, that would be fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay. Go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. On the next slide. Thank you. Again, under the K through 12 tab, and same for childcare, we have the Parents Guide, which is just a simplified version of the requirements, a one-pager, and it's basically the web text from those tabs. So those have also been translated into several threshold languages. So hopefully, most of the languages are covered for parents. Slide. And we do get quite a few questions about catch-up. So this is a catch-up tool for providers and schools that give the recommended minimum interval between doses. And so schools can use this to encourage parents to obtain missing doses toward the beginning of the interval. And then schools can refer to the conditional admission schedule for the deadlines for those doses. So those are some of the materials we wanted to highlight today for you. And then in the next few slides, we'll go through some of the questions that we've received in recent months about the school requirements. I know a lot of things are uncertain right now, so there are more questions than answers, it feels like sometimes. But we'll try to answer what we can for now, and then hope to have more answers up soon on Shots for School. Steve, are you on the line and able to go through some of the questions with me?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Great, yes.
All right. Our first question is one that we receive a lot of, even with some of the new changes that came out in 2019 when the ACIP met recently, but how it applies to school law. What's required for a 7th grader who has not received any doses of DTaP?
Yes, so if a student doesn't have any doses of DTaP, then they would need 1 dose of Tdap, and then 2 more of either TD or Tdap. So usually a provider would give Tdap first, and then either TD or Tdap for the final 2 doses. And there are some references here, if needed, including that our Department of Public Health vaccine catch-up schedule that we just looked at.
Okay, next question, please. School districts are in the process of enrolling students. They are concerned that students will not be getting vaccinated due to the pandemic. Will the pandemic affect requirements for the 2021 school year?
Yes, we've been getting this a lot the last several weeks. We are following the situation closely and are aware that the pandemic has made routine immunization more difficult. So at this time, the immunization requirements for school entry have not changed, but this is subject to ongoing review. For now, we encourage schools to continue collecting records as they normally would, and then potentially give students until the first day of school to provide additional records as needed to meet the requirements. And any updates we have, we will put those up on Shots for School.
Okay. How can schools obtain immunization records for incoming students while schools are closed for the pandemic?
Sure. So there are different documentation options that you may need to consider given the shelter-in-place limitations. So parents can mail hard copies of records. Parent or provider offices can scan records that they have and email or fax those. There might be other electronic options that you haven't had to use before that you may want to consider. And then the California Immunization Registry might be another source for records and finding doses that parents may not have records of currently or easily accessible.
Okay, and one more question before we move on. How can children get the vaccines they need for school during the pandemic?
Sure. So this can vary. Families should reach out to their child's provider and see what kind of availability they have for immunization appointments. Another option may be contacting the local health department or nearby pharmacy to see what options they have. And it might be something where the families have to check back periodically to see if that availability has changed. So it could be increasing in the coming weeks and months. So potentially over summertime, there'll be opportunities for getting immunized that currently are not available.
Yeah, and I'd just like to make a comment here on behalf of the folks, those of us that work back at the immunization branch on the afternoon teach program that we run every couple of months, that next month on June 24th, in light of what's going on with the coronavirus pandemic, we'll be having a special webinar that will be on June 24th, and we'll address some of the issues and concerns that you can share with your parents and your local providers to help increase immunization rates.
Great, thank you. So in the next few minutes, we'll switch gears a bit and talk more specifically about medical exemptions and the upcoming changes. So this is just a refresher of what the minimum requirements are for a medical exemption to a required immunization. So the exemption needs to be written by an MD or DO that's licensed in California. It has to include the specific nature of the physical condition or medical circumstance for why the physician is not recommending immunization. Needs to include each specific vaccine that's being exempted and whether the exemption is permanent or temporary. And then for temporary exemptions, the expiration date has to be within a year of the date of signing. And those underlined parts are specific to the language that went into effect on July 1st, 2019.
Okay, let's review some of the more common questions that we've been receiving. I have an incoming 7th grader with had disease written next to chicken pox on the blue card, yellow card. Is this sufficient, Amber?
So no medical exemption documentation would be used for this child, or they would need record of 2 doses of varicella vaccine. So many years ago, there was an exception in the Blue Book that said it was okay to accept a yellow card with had disease for chickenpox instead of requiring a full medical exemption. And this exception was removed as chickenpox disease became less common and the symptoms became harder to diagnose. And similarly, if a parent claims a history of chickenpox disease, that would also not be sufficient.
Thank you, Amber. Why don't we move on to our next one? What do the new medical exemption laws specifically SB 276 and SB 214, require for a medical exemption?
Sure. So this is a quick summary of the main provisions in the new medical exemption laws. So by January 1st, 2021, the California Department of Public Health must develop a medical exemption form, the exemption standards for reviewing the criteria and exemption, and develop a database to house new medical exemptions. The Department of Public Health is required to review a subset of those exemptions. So if a school or child care has less than a 95% immunization rate, then we would review those exemptions. If a school or child care does not report their immunization rates to the department, then we would review their exemptions. And if a physician submits 5 or more exemptions in a year, then we would look at those exemptions as well, the physician's exemptions as well. And exemptions that are already on file at schools, those may remain valid until the child enters the next grade span. And the grade spans again there's the child care grade span, the TK K through 6th grade span, and the 7th through 12th grade span. So once they get to the next grade span, they would need a new medical exemption or to start receiving the required immunizations or enter an alternative schooling program.
Okay, and if we could go on to the next slide, it's kind of a continuation of what we've been talking about.
Right. So if an exemption that's in the database is revoked because it does not meet national standards, then the parents will have an option to appeal that, and there will be an expert panel to review those exemptions and then render a final decision. And also in the laws, it talks about physicians who meet certain criteria being restricted from submitting new exemptions in the database. So currently, there are some FAQs available on the Immunization Branch website and also the Health and Human Services Agency website. And we hope to add more FAQs soon on shotsforschool.org, and of course we'll have more guidance coming soon about the laws.
Okay, and our next question, is the state on track in implementing electronic submissions of medical exemptions for the January 1st, 2021 start date?
Yes, we are on track. We're working to have the exemption database ready for submissions by January 1st, 2021. And again, as it gets closer to that date, we'll have more materials available on Shots for School.
Thank you. And one last question before we wrap up things. How will schools know whether an electronic medical exemption is submitted and then accepted or denied?
Sure. So the process by which schools receive medical exemptions is anticipated to be similar to the current process. So the big picture is physicians will log in to the medical exemption module, they'll fill in the required information, and then they'll submit that into the system. Physicians can then print a copy of that and give that to the give that to the parents, and then the parents can give that to the schools. And then schools will also be able to log into the exemption module and look up exemptions for their students. And then if an exemption is revoked at some point, then schools, parents, and other required parties will be notified of that revocation. And many more details and materials will be available on Shots for School, again, as we get closer to that January 1st date.
Thank you very much for that great presentation. We do have a number of questions, so I'm going to start at the top, and if it's okay with you, I will ask them, and I'm going to actually say the person's name. So if we need more clarification, you're welcome to unmute yourself and further explain your question, those of you that are participating and listening online. So from Grace Van Doren, she asked, to clarify, a complete series of Hep B is not required for 7th grade entry, as in a new student to the district, new admission, or does it apply to advanced as well?
Sure. So for 7th grade, whether the student is being admitted or advancing, they do not need 3 doses of hepatitis B. If the student is in admission at any other grade, then they do need 3 doses of hepatitis B vaccine.
Thank you. Does that clarify your question, Grace?
Yeah, thank you. So if an 8th grader is admitted new to the district, they would need a completed Hep B series?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question. This is from Kathy, and I'm going to slaughter her last name, Graysack, I believe. She was mentioning that they haven't seen the handbook, and a new handbook in years. She was really excited about it. She wanted to know, and I think you answered this, but I'm not sure if I caught it. You can get this online, or could they order it, or could it be sent to the schools? And Kathy, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you have further information to ask.
So the latest handbook is available electronically on shotsforschool.org. We do not currently have hard copies though, but you can certainly print it yourself and create a binder with it if you want.
I didn't realize you could print it, so that is great. And I have a question down the line that in Lompoc, I'm finding that kids get 1 dose of Tdap, and then when they go back for more shots, they're not getting the second TD. I'm always having to call the clinics. So any suggestions on how to make sure the clinics are aware? Because yeah, on their immunization, it says they don't need another TD for 10 years. So they're not getting the second and third TD to be compliant.
So this is Adriana, and I can follow up on that question, Kristen. If you notice a pattern with any of the local clinics, and that goes for any school nurse, where they're not administering what they should be administering, you can give us a call, and we can always follow up with them here locally and provide them additional education and guidance.
That would be great. Thank you.
And do you have the phone number for our immunization program?
Yes, I think so. But would you give it to me just so I make sure?
Yes, it's area code 805-346-8420.
420. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ladies. We have another hepatitis B question, and it's from M. Bassi, and it says, does a student trigger the admission requirements regarding Hep B if changing schools in the same district, such as a move to different elementary school or from regular high school to continuation school?
So there is variation at the local level in whether they would consider that a new admission or not. In immunization regulations, admission is defined as first entry to a school. So if the district is using that definition, then yes, they would be a new admission. But, you know, we're aware that some districts make a distinction between students transferring within district versus coming in from a different district.
Okay, thank you. This one I'm not sure what it's reflecting, so I'm going to ask. It's Johnson Bao, I think is how you say your last name. Can we accept a photo from the parent? And I'm trying to remember what that is in relation to.
I'm
You're
sorry,
welcome.
that was in a relation to if a parent takes a picture of the immunization card and sends it to us via something electronically.
Great.
Sure. I think in particular with these unusual times, if that's the best way they can get it to you, then great. I would say it should be clear. You know, all the same information should be in that photo, just to confirm that it is, you know, the child's name, date of birth, etc.
Great, thank you. This is from A English. What is a nurse's role in enforcement? I have several students who are not up to date with their immunizations. I've notified administration and the families, however, they continue to attend school.
Well, they are subject to exclusion. However, you would typically exclude a child from being on campus who shouldn't be on campus. You could use a similar approach until the parents have submitted the updated documentation.
That's a tough question. That's a tough question.
I think if I can add to that, I think it's good to remind administration that in the past we have had from the state where they've gone out and done audits for individuals, and those that were found to have attended school when they were not meeting their immunization requirements were asked to pay back the ADA money that they received. So that is something that has happened in the past, and you know, I don't know if it will happen in the future, but it is something that should be brought up to administration.
Hey,
I know. Sorry.
That's a nice stick that I can wave around to admin. Hopefully that will get some action. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If we have any admin on the line, I know I saw a couple of you. Did you have a thought on that question? Okay, we'll continue on. Kim Donnell has asked, have you heard anything that will require vaccination for COVID-19 or, and I'm going to say this wrong, serological testing required to prove immunity?
So at this time, we don't have any information on that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I just had another question. Sometimes also I've seen medical exemptions come across for students that have IEPs. You know, the sped ed students that they say that they have a waiver because they're sped ed students, they don't have to, you know, have the vaccines. Have you had to deal with that, or what is your suggestions on those situations?
Sure. So for there's a provision in law that was put in SB 277 a few years back, and talks about that students should have access to all the services identified in their IEP, regardless of immunization status. So districts and LEAs are able to kind of implement that in different ways. So we typically refer folks to their, county office of education or LEA on implementing that provision. For example, some schools are able to provide certain IEP services in the home. And so if a student, for example, has speech therapy in their IEP, maybe the district can provide that service at home to a student. And so their policy could be that the child would need to meet the immunization requirements in order to be on campus. Some schools don't have that ability, so they might have a different policy. So there's some variation at the local level.
Okay, thank you.
Kimberly Kelly has asked if a provider who writes an exemption cites HIPAA and states that they do not need to state the reason, what is the recourse?
So including the specific nature of the reason for the exemption is required by state law. And typically it's the parent who's giving the exemption letter to the school, in which case HIPAA does not apply, since the parent is not a HIPAA covered entity. So the school, could go back to the parent and say, the doctor needs to include the specific nature of the condition in the exemption letter.
And if that doesn't occur, because I have seen it where within the exemption letter, it's written, because of HIPAA, I don't have to tell you, basically. So, and yes, the parent is presenting us with the letter, but what do we do? Do we need to pass that on to public health? What would we do?
Well, I would let the parent know that the documentation is not complete until all of the information required of the exemption is in there. So the child does not have complete immunization documentation until that point, and should not be allowed to attend until that documentation meets the requirement.
Okay, thank you.
We have a question from L. Snyder. With a permanent exemption, is there any time limit on when the exemption was written? That is, if for an incoming kindergartner, a new grade span, the permanent exemption was written 1 year ago, can we still accept it?
So we do plan to have more guidance on this soon on Shots for School, but the exemption the parent will likely need to get a new exemption. But we hope to have guidance on that very soon.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
From Grace Van Doren, she asked, what if it's CAIR, has contradicted or had disease in lieu of VZVIZ? Does that suffice? And Grace, if you're there and want to go further, go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned, right, so you mentioned that like had disease on a yellow card does not meet the standard, but what if it's in care?
It would still need to be a medical exemption letter.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah Williams asks about medical exemptions. Again, here's another medical exemption question. A parent was told by the school that their child's medical exemption was unacceptable because it did not include the specific nature of physical condition or medical circumstance. The parent replied that the specific nature of the physical condition or the medical circumstance are protected by HIPAA laws and not required to be disclosed. The parent continued that the document is valid and in accordance to current laws and guidelines. Can you clarify how to respond to a scenario such as that?
Sure. So sounds similar to the prior question. Again, if the parent doesn't consent to providing the information that's required by a school, then it's considered incomplete until they meet those requirements. If you'd like to share more specifics, that might be something you could email info@shotsforschool.org or Adriana.
Okay, and we can get you Adriana's information if you'd like to reach back out to me. I will get you her email.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is from Tanya, and I'm gonna, again, I apologize for saying it wrong, Bosch. I hope I'm saying that correctly. When stating a full medical exemption from varicella, is that referring to this same medical exemption criteria just outlined? How will that be reflected on the blue immunization sheet?
So on the blue card, you'll see next to each of the vaccines, there's a permanent medical exemption box. So a student who had disease, the doctor could write a note saying, you know, the student is permanently exempt from chickenpox due to disease on such and such date. And then you could mark the permanent medical exemption box on the blue card for varicella.
Okay, thank you. This is from Valerie Meisenheimer. I think I said that last name incorrectly again, sorry.
Mine was actually, it was talked about already in a different question.
In a different one. Valerie, yours was.
Special ed and IEP students.
Yeah, so we're okay. Okay, thank you. Grace, again, Grace Van Doren asked, we cannot prevent a non-immunized or incompletely immunized student with an IEP from accessing his or her education. We strongly encourage the immunizations for our IEP kiddos, but they're not on campuses accessing their education of IZ's status. So thank you, Grace, for that comment. Did you want to go further on that?
No, just that we just can't prevent them from accessing their education because of due to IZ status.
Okay, thank you for that. I am not seeing any further questions. For those of you that are still thinking and for our public health, are there any further questions before we move on to our next activity?
This is Grace Van Doren again. Sorry, I just was dealing with this issue with the parent regarding the HIPAA. So I was reviewing a permanent medical exemption that didn't state the specific nature because the doctor said because of HIPAA reasons. And so the mom and I were kind of going back and forth on it, but it's sort of like if a parent has a child with like type 1 diabetes, that parent's going to let us know about the child's condition because we need to know specifics in order to make sure that child's safe at school. So it's kind of the same thing that the medical exemption comes from the parent to the school. It does have to be written by a doctor, much like school orders would. So that argument about HIPAA doesn't really hold water when you look at it that way.
Yeah, and that's a good point that, you know, parents are potentially sharing health information about their student for many reasons with the schools.
Looks like we have one final question here, and then we'll put this to a close. We have from Azita, can family history of adverse reaction to an IZ be accepted as the reason for medical exemption?
It might be helpful if you could email that question. If you wouldn't mind emailing that to info@shotsforschool.org, just so we have a little more information.
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to call my, but we all need to know the answer. Thank you all for your wonderful chat questions here. There's another final, I keep seeing a few pop up here and there. What if you have a student with immune issues genetically documented that are not disclosed to the student, but IZ?
I'm not sure I understand all the specifics. Is this specific language that's from a medical exemption letter?
So Annette Lawrence, would you like to unmute yourself and share a little more?
Sure. Yeah, we have had, I can't tell you the number, but it's 1 or 2 students that have had, and the parent did, I shouldn't say the parent, the doctor did disclose that it was genetically documented. So that they actually gave the reason why. But to kind of piggyback on, well, if your student might not have, for example, diabetes or another immune issue that the school specifically has to kind of monitor or take care of while the student is at your campus, there could be students that have immune issues that are genetically documented and the doctor tells you that, or they might not tell you that, but it's still, the student is still, I'm sorry, I didn't finish my sentence when I hit return too quick. But immunization is exempt. You know, they're still writing for an exemption. So it's kind of a question, but also a statement that there might be students, you know, we do have students that have immune issues that are genetically documented according to the doctor, and they give those documented genetic issues, and that is the reason for the exemption from the immunization. So I take it that is a fair exemption, for example.
Sure, yes, I'd say as long as the exemption includes the specific nature of the condition, and that's okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, at this time, I'd like to bring back in my wonderful colleague, Deborah Geiger. And for our wonderful panel at Public Health, we just really sincerely thank you for your time today and your information. It was really, I think, helpful for all. especially during this school closure. We're all wondering about how we're going to open back up school and how all of this will look come fall. So we will be moving into our roundtable discussion time, and we welcome Public Health to stay with us if you do have the time. If you don't have the time, we are just, again, sincerely grateful for you to be here today. Deborah, would you like to join in with me today?
Sure. And I also wanted to thank California Public Health for coming, and we greatly appreciated all the valuable information, and we appreciate you taking the time to answer the questions. Thank you. So we are going to start our roundtable discussions, and as everybody knows, in the past, this literally meant we went to roundtables. But under the current circumstances in our Zoom environment, we are going to just have discussions about each topic. And we decided to do it that way because often somebody asks a question that is valuable to the entire group and to all of our school nurses. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to hear all of the questions and the conversation amongst the group. So we will, Jennifer and I will be monitoring any questions that do show up on the chat, but we would like to just kind of talk about each topic, and you can put questions on the chat and we'll just put, present them to the entire group and have a conversation. Okay? So shall we go to our first question or anything else, Jennifer?
Yes. Nope, this is fabulous. So our first question is regarding immunizations and precautions with immunizations. So I know as a committee, our committee talked about this new norm of what are some things that are going to happen in the future and how are we going to use the precautions for immunizations, knowing that we have this pandemic occurring. And so we just like to open it up right now to thoughts or concerns or questions related to this topic.
Please feel free to type a question in the chat, or you may unmute yourself. Maybe since we talked about immunization so much with public health, are there no other questions or discussion amongst all of you?
We may, oh, here we go. So we have a question regarding precautions with immunizations. So I believe the topic was, is there anything we need to be concerned about with students who are coming into school in the fall that have not had those full immunizations because of COVID-19 and they haven't gone to the doctor and they're coming in without their immunizations completed, I believe is where we were going. And Debbie, you can add to that if you had more thoughts, or our panel for that matter, if you have further information.
And I think that public health had talked about this a little bit, so that may be why there aren't any other questions. If somebody could comment on that, please. So I'm guessing there are no questions on this area because we talked so much about it with the presentation.
Okay.
And Jeanette Porter just said they will be excluded from school, no changes. And they said what public health did say was to watch on Shots for School for any updates. But at this point, it's just like everything else right now. Things are changing and we get, a lot of questions, and just keep looking on Shots for School for direction. And our public health departments are talking about what to do during COVID-19 and as we go back into school.
Debbie, we do have a question from Debbie, another Debbie, and she's asking, is family history to an IZ be accepted as a reason for medical exemption.
So I'm going to ask on some of these questions, probably since neither Jennifer nor I are nurses, we'll ask some other nurses to chime in and answer some of these questions and help us out. Okay? Does anybody want to respond to that? Is family history to an immunization accepted as the reason for medical exemption? Has anybody ever had that?
It looks as though I'm seeing here, Debbie, that most of our exemptions say family history of adverse reactions as an excuse. We need to know if we can accept this. So do you want to read Nessa's response?
Sure. Nessa said, I think as long as it is written by a doctor, you have to accept.
If our public health folks are on line and want to jump in, they're welcome to.
Okay, and then Lynn said I would question this reason further. And Grace said our county's public health department has asked us to redact and forward any medical exemptions that we have questions regarding specific reasons. We have received instruction from public health department that it is acceptable. And then Linda Furness said if it goes through the online exception website, then we would accept. Any other questions on that topic?
I had a comment.
Sure.
Marian Bassey from Lompoc. I think the IEP students without immunizations, it's very important to keep track of them and have a tickler file on who doesn't have immunizations, because I've seen two situations where we had to inform student body without adequate shots, because in San Diego we had the measles outbreak, and that was still when people could easily not have their immunizations because of personal exemptions. So we had to call them and tell them what waiting rooms the kids had been in, and to be aware that we might be calling them and telling them they could not come to school. So I've seen that with measles. And then here we had an IEP student get varicella, chickenpox. And so she was excluded. And then we did get another mild case in a student who had just one immunization. So it's important definitely to keep a tickler file in case there is an outbreak. And then yearly just talk with the parents again and encourage them to get the immunizations, possibly see why they're not doing it, what fears they have, and try to inform them. So that's from my experience with the IEP students.
Thank you for that. That's a good suggestion. Kathy did, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just wondering if anybody else wanted to share or have any other comment on that particular topic?
Yes, this is Diane Fulton, the lead nurse in Mayo Valley Unified School District. And I just would say with the SPED students, what we found the district nurses in our district was that they are being told by non-nursing people that maybe school psychologists or whatever, that they cannot be excluded if they do not receive their immunizations. And so we just clarified with them that while we can't exclude them for not getting the mandated immunizations, in the event of an outbreak of any of the immunized diseases that are required, they could be excluded for a long period of time. And we set exclusions for the different diseases. And a lot of the parents, when they saw that, they had their children immunized because they don't want to have their child home for 21 days or anything like that. So they were not, that piece of the information was left out. So sometimes if you share that with them, it corrects the problem. They just were not aware of that. They can't be excluded for enrollment initially, but if there's a disease outbreak, they can be by public health. So that's I just wanted to say that.
Good comments. Thank you so much. Okay, Debbie, I think we should move on to our next topic. Are you
I'm ready.
Ready. All right. So this is reopening, ready, set, go. So obviously we have had quite a hiccup with this pandemic, and we just wanted to have some dialogue with all of you about preparing for the fall and how to prepare for the fall and what folks are thinking about and so forth at this time.
And I just want to add that I had a meeting with our school nurses this morning, and I'm going to put y'all on the spot because you had a lot of great things to say about this. So if we could start this conversation.
So I see Lori is sharing that districts are asking how much PPE we use, we should be ordering, and how do we calculate this? Okay, and I see Linda is asking, are you able to summarize what we know about opening in the fall so far? Debbie, I think you and I could tag team on that one. The first one about PPE, I'm not sure about calculating how much to order, and maybe others can chime in on that one.
Are you, if I could just ask a clarifying question, are you asking for how much for staff? What is that? If Lori, if you could expand, explain that question, please.
Well, yeah, we don't know for staff, for students, how much we should be ordering. I know for CSNO, we're trying to come up with a document as far as guidelines, and that should be due coming out any day now. But is there any thought from CDE, from public health, who should be wearing the PPE, what kind of PPE we should be using, and how much we should, like if we've got a certain number of students, a certain number of staff, how much should we be ordering for the fall?
I think that is a pretty common question. I know that the Santa Barbara County Ed Office school nurses are asking the exact same questions. So I'm going to open it up to any comments from everybody. And Lori, with you in your role with CSNO, I would imagine that will be very helpful for all of us as well. So I would just like to open it up to conversation, and if people have any comments to make regarding this topic.
So I'm happy to speak to the little bit that I know about Santa Barbara County. This is Kirsten Escobedo. I'm the Assistant Sup for Special Ed for Santa Barbara County Ed Office. And my understanding of what's happening within Santa Barbara County, not just our local education agency, but the whole county, is there are representatives from several different entities, including education, public health, business, et cetera, who are on a work group together to answer some of these questions and others like the ones that you're asking. I believe that San Luis Obispo County, again, not the educational entity, but the whole county of San Luis, has come up with a document with recommendations in it. I haven't seen it, so I can't speak to specifically what's in there. Because I know that the Santa Barbara County work group is looking at some of the recommendations in San Luis as a start, a guide to start. And so we expect in our county, Santa Barbara County, that a document should be released sometime in the next couple weeks, and Santa Barbara County Public Health is an integral part of that. So we expect that will give some guidelines. It will give guidelines to schools, districts, and LEAs on things that they can consider, should consider in terms of recommendations for reopening. That's the most current information that I have. And all the questions that you were asking and sharing in the chat are the questions I think that everybody has, right? And because we know we need to start preparing soon.
Kirsten,
you.
Kirsten, before you unmute yourself, I think that the one question is poignant, and you sort of answered it. But just as far as our county goes with reopening, is there further information from, at the county level that you could share with all of us regarding the reopening and how that may look? Some of the questions, some of the ideas people have.
Right. No, that's a great question. And I think every district or local education agency is coming up with their own reopening plan. The work group that I referenced is putting together something that will be a guideline. My understanding is that, obviously we'll need to follow any requirements put forward by public health or the governor or anything along those lines. But I think that there are different discussions about, will it be distance learning? Will it be in-person learning? Will it be a hybrid of both? I think those are the kinds of things that districts are thinking about. And, how do we social distance? The question about the protective gear that was raised is something else that people are thinking about. No specific answers yet, but I would look to your individual administrations to give some guidelines on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to science. A lot of people have written some more questions. So Jennifer, if it's okay with you to move on to some questions. Okay.
Absolutely.
So Nessa said, make sure you don't get N95 masks. They need to be fit tested, too much time and cost. Nessa, did you want to unmute yourself and expand on that? Or did you have anything else to say about that?
Sorry. Yeah, no, I don't have much to expand on that, but I do know that N95 masks, though everyone thinks that those are the best and they are great and they're healthcare workers. So I have had people in administration like, oh, we should have those, but those need to be fit tested for accuracy. And I mean, those costs can be anywhere from $60 to like $250 for a fit test. And then if you were to change the brand, you would have to do it all over again. So I just think, just make sure that you're not going to a mask that is not necessary for a school setting.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Jennifer asked if there's a guide from California Department of Ed. And Jennifer, is your question a relationship to opening up schools?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and Kirsten.
Kirsten answered that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. And then Linda Furness said the concern is also, will the orders be able to be filled when they are ordered? And I realize I missed Miranda's question. What guidelines has public health put in place for requirements for students to be able to come and attend school and staff? So I'm going to go back to Miranda. Sorry about skipping you. So that, and again, I think, more to come on that.
My understanding from what I've heard from Kirsten, and I know Kirsten is there as well, this workforce is going to put together some guidelines that districts will take on, look at, and adapt to meet their district needs.
Right, and I was just going to jump in on that. I saw that question in the chat. I think obviously there are more questions than answers right now. There was a reference in one of the questions to, budget shortfalls and equipment not being readily available. Those are things that people are obviously aware of and discussing, and asking questions to the state, right? In regards to the question about, if districts are making their own decisions, my understanding as of right now, and things change, right, on a frequent basis with this COVID-19 pandemic, is that there are certain guidelines that will be required. For example, from public health, right? We'll need to follow the safety guidelines from public health. And then certainly anything that's in accordance with Governor Newsom's stages of reopening, right? But my understanding is that within those bigger picture items, districts then are making their own individual decisions in terms of what best meets the needs for their district. Because one thing to think about, right, is if you're talking about the need for social distancing among all of our students, not just those with IEPs, districts have very different needs, right? You might have some smaller districts that have class sizes that are smaller, right? Maybe 15 to 20 students in a class. There, it is theoretically easier for them to come up with some kind of a social distancing protocol than it might be for a district that has 30 or 35 students in a class, right? For older kids, for example. So that's just one example of the types of things that our districts have to think about and would have to make based on their own unique needs.
Thank you.
One of the question is what's coming up. I have small schools, I have high schools, and I am working literally with the superintendent. And one of the things is they want to know what are some of the minimum requirements so we can calculate this classroom thing. How are we getting students on campus, busing,
right,
and cleaning in between, the staggering, applies for us, applies for the students. Then you have the special day classes, which is a whole different ball of wax. Where, okay, what supplies do we need for them? It's like we're looking at, like you said, a logistical nightmare. And even to get one step started, it is like we need to know. That's where I'm like, from with public health, we're hearing, well, we'll get the guidelines, but unless we have some of these basic guidelines, it's very hard to predict of what we are looking for in fall. And I hear all kinds of things, and fall is coming very fast, as is another flu season. So we really need to start looking at all of these, and that's why I'm kind of glad that the universities are putting up A, B, and C, because the more and more I look like it, this is what we need to look at. Especially since our numbers have been pretty low in our area, we're going to be vulnerable. So the chances when it starts to come and getting hit is also bigger. So you have all these things to look at. So I'm kind of, I was kind of sad to hear that public health was already kind of disappearing, because I really wanted to pick their brain a little bit.
Yeah, my hope was they would stay. Yeah.
Kirsten, with these committees that are making decisions, do you have school nurses on those committees? Because yes, we are also public health nurses, and we know our school environments, and we know that how things would have to be applied in our school districts. Do you know if your committee has school nurses on it, or if the other committees you've talked to?
And that's a great question. I'm not part of that work group that's working with the whole county, being the county of Santa Barbara, not the county education office, right, of Santa Barbara. It's a little bit different there. Public health is represented. Beyond that, I can't speak to exactly who is representing, if there are nurses besides public health on there. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I think that that kind of, I think, goes to the local district and LEA piece of it, right, is how they're making decisions and who they're including in the conversation and getting input from. So I think that would really be something you'd need to talk to your local folks about. I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of everybody because I don't know.
Lori, I emailed Susan Saxido and told her to recommend to all superintendents to make sure they have a school nurse on their recovery committee. She responded back to me. She said, I got your message. I am going to look into this. So hopefully we can get this to pass through.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to say, if any of the administrators are on the call, do remember that we know our schools and we know our districts. And so we can look at how we can apply these guidelines in the places that we're at.
Can I just ask Lori and Miranda, what districts are you, where do you work?
So I'm with Guadalupe Union School District, And I'm also the Central Coast Section President of CSNO. So I've
Oh, great.
trying to
Okay.
speak for a lot of the nurses right now.
Okay. And Miranda?
I worked for the Sentinel Special Education Consortium. My schools
great.
is actually Sentinel High School, Sentinel Charter School, and Vista Del Mar. So I
Okay.
literally have from a tiny, tiny school to a high school that covers a whole valley.
You absolutely do. Yes. Well, thank you both for your input. And I know there's a lot of other questions in the chat, but really, really helpful to hear your perspective and, you know, kind of the concerns that you have. So thank you for that. Jennifer and Debbie, I will stop hijacking your meeting here and let you go back to it.
We're happy to have you.
I want to say it's fabulous to have your input, like Kirsten. Thank you so very much. And thank you for the questions. I am just going to go back to what Linda said, just because I don't feel that, you know, I didn't put an exclamation mark on there. Her question is, the concern is also, will the orders be able to be filled when they are ordered? So pretty sure none of us have the answer to that, but we sure hope so.
And I would add just again, the meetings that Kirsten and I and Debbie have been on in the last few weeks. As you all know, everything is evolving so quickly still, and there are so many changes coming down the pike and guidance coming down the pike that please be rest assured that the people that are on this committee and the people that are working at the administration level, Susan Salcedo and all of our superintendents are really very, very much taking into consideration every aspect of our reopening and the safety of our staff and students. So just if you can just hold on to that one thought, is really, really thinking hard about the busing and the social distancing and the class sizes and the cleaning of the buildings and what sort of learning will occur come fall. And then of course, if we have another outbreak again, as we've all kind of heard, this is going to happen again and we have to go back into shelter in place. How is that going to look again? So there's all those components that are really being discussed at this time. Debbie, did I miss anything, Debbie, on that chat that we should go back through? I think
I'm looking at it right now, but I want to go back to Kirsten. Kirsten, at one point it looked as if you might be unmuting yourself. Did you want to add to that? No? Okay. Okay, so Grace said, I'm trying to wrap my head around how to roll out annual trainings at the very beginning of the year. So far, we're thinking of using videos and Zoom. However, EpiPen training includes return demonstration, which requires getting trainers to the sites. Does anyone have some procedures in place? I open that question up to the group. And has anybody even made any plans for how to do training, specialized healthcare procedures or any trainings for when we get back to school? I mean, again, this is all part of what everybody's talking about, that, you know, we're working on just the plans, and this would be a component of the return to school plan. Next one, Joy said, Grace, thought your question, if they join the Zoom on site, could they use the trainers that are there? I'm sorry, Joyce, could you, if there are trainers, Joyce, would you unmute yourself and ask that question, please?
Oh, I was just saying to Grace that if she has the staff be on site going into the Zoom, then if their trainers are already on site, then they could do the trainers in the Zoom. And I think we already covered that she would have the ability to place trainers at the site so that her team could do it that way.
Thank you. Okay, some of these questions and comments we've talked about, but I'm going to go through them and make sure we don't miss anything. So Lori, you said many of the things we will need to safely reopen will cost money. How will this be done in a time of severe budget restrictions? And I believe Kirsten addressed that in her response. And then Tanya, a lot of PPEs is not available readily, for example, masks, Purell. Okay. Grace, okay, this is in response to that.
Staff.
Yes, go ahead. Okay. I don't want to miss somebody. If somebody wants to say something, please feel free to. If I go on, then just stop. Say, Debbie, I wanted to say something. So please jump in. And Lori said, would public health be willing to do fit testing for the school nurses? Lori, is your question in relationship to N95 masks?
Yes. In relation to N95, some of the guidelines that we're talking about with CSNO would be having them for certain specified instances, to have them in the health offices for the school nurses or the other health office staff. We're trying to say that probably the recommendation would be against using aerosolized nebulizers, but there could be other instances where we need an N95. And so I'm just wondering if we could come up with an agreement with public health for the school nurses to go and get fit tested, or the health assistants or anything like that. Is that an option instead of, thinking about getting like Nessa said, we can't get everyone fit tested, but there are definitely times that we're going to need an N95.
Well, I think this is a good question for us to ask public health, and maybe it's something that can be discussed in the one of the committees. Kirsten? Okay.
We could also forward it to that email they sent us today, that shots.org. We could forward that question.
Okay.
Okay. I think we have the next one's a comment from Kirsten. Lori and Tanya, your questions are exactly the type of questions the work group is discussing.
Okay, great. Okay, and then Tanya, so are we supposed to understand that each district is making their own decisions as to reopening and not by the county? So Kirsten talked about that. So that is accurate.
I think, hello?
Yes.
It's Tanya, sorry.
Hi.
I think my question is if, I don't know when and I can't type as fast as my mind is going and trying to keep up with everybody also. So I wasn't trying to state that, superintendents and people aren't seeking information. I guess what I'm saying is if they don't know who to seek information from, i.e. if they're waiting on the county to help, give answers, and the county doesn't yet have answers. And I think maybe a better question to have asked would have been, and I think it was asked, but I don't know if there was a clear answer, who is on this task force, and how do we find out about being involved? Because I don't know, I haven't spoke to our superintendent, so I don't mean to imply that, but my gut tells me that they rely strongly on their nurses, being us, for information. And if we don't have the information, how does this all come together? I think is a better question.
Kirsten, did you want to, I think you were talking about that. So Tanya, your question is who is on this task force?
Yes, and how do we make certain that our important representatives, at the district level, have this information, this important information? Because we as a group of nurses are, continuing every day, as I'm sure everybody else is, to watch the news and try to pay attention and try to follow. And, you've got all of, this information and misinformation, as high as the president. And so, yes, I guess that's what I'm saying is how do we as nurses offer support and, our advice, because we are the ones at the schools if we really don't have the answers to give?
My thought on that is I think I would share your questions, concerns, offer of assistance with your superintendent, or in your local LEA, because they're the ones that could pass along that information to the folks on the work group.
Okay, and how, excuse me, sorry. How do they reach said work group, or do they already know? Maybe I'm asking.
So where are you? What district?
Lompoc Unified.
Okay, so your superintendent and your administration has been involved in the regular meetings. So Dr. Salcido has, since the COVID-19 closure started, she's been, Susan Salcido, the county superintendent of schools, has been hosting regular meetings with all of the superintendents throughout Santa Barbara County. And so all of the superintendents have been participating in those. And so your, I think, best next step, right, with some of the questions that you're raising, which are good ones, would be to ask those questions of your administration in Lompoc. And then they either, if they don't have the information already, they could then potentially bring that back to those regular meetings that Dr. Salcido's having. Because my sense is, just being part of this group today, is that a lot of us have the same questions, and so we'll be hearing those same questions come through, the different channels.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, Jennifer, shall we move on?
Yes, please.
Okay. So from Grace, N95s meet the Chinese standard, or KN95s meet the Chinese standard. They have the same efficacy as N95s regarding filtration, but they do not have more leakage, therefore they will not pass fit testing. The upside is they're more comfortable to wear. Any questions about that or comments on that? Jennifer?
I think we're good on that one. Good comment on that. The next one, I don't think, unless PhD says differently, we will need that level of mask in a school setting. If there are clinics that would be different. So school setting, again, I think, again, we're going to get that guidance as far as mask wearing from that workforce. They're going to be sharing, a lot about mask wearing and things like that as well through that workforce.
And then the same goes for Jeanette's question, when to expect to get the guidelines from public health. And then Jeanette, did you have anything else on that before we move on?
Not really. It's just that that's what we need before we can go forward with a lot of the planning. So hopefully we'll get those soon.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Kimberly, in addition to COVID, Kawasaki disease is just beginning to be talked about as a COVID-related health concern with children. Are we considering children and social distancing difficulties with children? If we are gathering in person, will we be expected to take temperatures of all who are on site? Cost of probe covers or special thermometers, masks, will this cost be solely absorbed by the individual school district, state, federal? And again, I think that goes back to Kirsten's discussion about the work group. That those are all the sort of things being discussed, correct, Kirsten?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Again, more talk on N95 from Grace. She thinks it would not be used throughout the day, just if there were a room full of students. And then if you have a student with a trach or someone that needs suctioning needs, Slow PhD says you need the N95 mask. This came up just in addition. Debbie, I think you may have been on the email yesterday with our students who are deaf and hard of hearing and wearing the masks that are the lip readers. that's a big challenge to consider as well as we move forward through this mask wearing time for our students with hearing impairments. Something else to consider with the masks. Temperature screening from Tanya, which has proven ineffective with so many people, including children, proving asymptomatic. Who is guiding our district representatives, superintendent, et cetera, when they are not getting or seeking medical advice or opinions? Oops, sorry about that. So again, I think we're going to have a lot of these answers. I just feel like
you already answered that question.
Yeah.
I jumped ahead, and I'm sorry about that. So
that's okay. We just want to make sure we hit them all, right, Debbie?
Absolutely. We don't want to miss a single thing. So this is our time for all of us to get together, and what a year, so much information now, and everybody has so many questions. So we want to make sure we don't miss anything.
Jill has specific things already in place. I have lots of staff asking about the N95s. I don't have any students that require them. That's from Nessa. Oxnard Unified School District also does as Ventura County office with regulations. Very good. I'm just moving forward if that's okay. If a person from Cassandra, if a person in a learning model is anticipated that teachers will wear masks to teach and children will be required to wear masks or face shields to learn. Again, the meetings I have been in, and I know Kirsten has been in them as well, those things are being discussed. Kirsten did mention are we all coming back to school at the same time? Are we going to have some of the students there and some of them, the other half on distance learning, and then switch? There's a lot of, and they're calling that kind of a hybrid type model. There's a lot of discussion on how many students in a classroom and who's going to wear the mask, who's not. Debbie, do you want to take Grace's?
Sure. I have so many comments, questions. Very true. I think I'll just stop right there. My administration has suggested each classroom be outfitted with a thermometer. I'm strongly encouraging placing our energies elsewhere, namely hand washing. Has any district discussed temperature taking versus symptom check versus something else to be done class-wide? I think so many of these answers go back to, all of the conversations happening right now, amongst everybody in the work group and the superintendent discussion. But is there any discussion amongst the school nurses in the group?
This goes all back to the public health guidelines. What do they require? Just like they have businesses now, they want staff to come in, they need temperature check and go through the system, to all the signs and symptoms. This is what we are waiting for from public health to give us the guidelines. What is the minimum requirements? It can be that they say just do signs and symptoms. It might be say temperature. It might be nothing. I foresee more that we're going to look at that we do have to do temperature checks and signs and symptoms like we are seeing in all the other businesses that have to open up.
Thank you, Miranda.
I'll jump in here too, because with multiple schools and seriously like one thermometer at a high school that has 1,700 kids, how are we going to do thermometer checks and temp checks and symptom checks? There's one nurse or one health assistant or one LVN. Yeah, so we are waiting for guidelines from you guys, but it's a difficult proposition to try to do this.
Kathy, on that, I just do want to add, I don't know if everyone has seen that NASN has a petition for the federal government to add 10,000 new school nurses to respond to this COVID-19. So I want to encourage you all to sign that. That will help us as far as some of the work that we need to get done.
I did see that. Thank you.
you. Okay, so Jennifer asked, we are doing everything we can do be on every committee there is. To be on every committee there is, okay. Grace answered Cassandra, we're leaning towards suggested mask use instead of required. We'll have to put out some guidelines regarding proper masks use, i.e. proper usage, cleaning. Sarah Williams, I am concerned about the physical location of health offices in the school setting. They are often small, enclosed spaces located inside the main office and not big enough to implement social distancing or prevent a symptomatic student from coughing on a student coming in for a Band-Aid. Will there be any guidelines for health offices coming out?
CSNO is working on that. And one of the recommendations, like I said, this is not finalized yet, but one of the recommendations is we will need a separate spot for students or staff that either have symptoms and they're waiting to go home, or that we know were should be isolated because of contacts that they had. And so that is going to be a problem, is trying to find a separate place. And also the recommendation will be that they have to have an adult in that room, and ideally it should also have a bathroom nearby, because you can't just have people waiting there and you don't want to be going across the school to get to a bathroom if they need to go. So like I said, that has not come out yet, but that's one of the things that we've been talking about. And also another physical change that we're going to be recommending is in high traffic areas, putting in like plexiglass barriers, like in the front office or even possibly in the health offices, if that's possible. So that's what I was asking before about money.
Thank you, Lori.
Continuing, Nessa was sharing that she does not support thermometers in all rooms. She's gonna, it's just a tough one. Sarah had talked about planning 2 separate areas for each school, one sick room with ventilation and one area where injured students or medication administration can occur. Staffing these 2 rooms will be interesting since we have a nurse team of 8 in 15 schools. So yes, we're gonna have to really, Lori, I was happy to hear you share your information just now. There's gonna have to be some creativity as far as where that health office is and where, how to separate those folks out. Santa Barbara SIPES Noel ATP prevention program recommends minimum N95 or similar masks for any employees at risk of exposure to novel ATP such as COVID. Should we be considering having those on hand and fit testing for our office staff who may be the first to see a student with symptoms? That's really good advice. Excellent idea.
Can I add something to that too?
Yes.
Because it's through SIPE, and if SIPE is recommending it, then SIPE funding can be used for that. So that there is funding for that through SIPE.
Great.
Okay, shall we move on?
Please.
Okay. Linda said, Grace, it's an excellent idea to have a well-ventilated sick room. And then Sarah said, thanks, Grace. Would outdoor space be a good option for symptomatic students, in your opinion? Sort of an outdoor triage before the student comes into an enclosed space. I am concerned not only for other students requiring care, but for office staff protection. Grace, did you want to respond?
I did a little bit later, but in the chat, but I was actually thinking of outdoor space for the first aid and medication administration, or something like that, instead of the ill kiddos outside, because they probably won't want to sit or stand or whatever outside if they're feeling puny and waiting for a parent to pick them up. So I was actually thinking of reversing it and having the well station outside, perhaps, if the weather permits. But again, staffing is going to be interesting and challenging.
Thank you. Okay, Kendra said, thank you, Lori, answered my question. And then Julie, Grace, how did your district decide that masks are recommended but not required?
Okay, so this is Grace. I responded again a little bit later. So we're just in the planning stages, and let me just put a plug in. If you are a district nurse or a lead nurse, it's a little bit more difficult than if you're in administration at your district, but yeah, you can always offer your suggestions to your admin or go up your chain of command. And that's just kind of how I got involved in our district's reopening plans. And so it can be done, but we are discussing not making masks mandated if we're in person and we don't necessarily have to socially distance. If we have to socially distance, then it may still be sort of a recommendation if they can't keep kids 6 feet away from each other in the classroom. But yeah, some of those kids, if they have asthma or like hard of hearing or just some other things where it makes masks difficult to keep on because they're not comfortable. And still, if kids are touching their masks, it's not a foolproof way of preventing illness. So we're just, again, in the planning stages, but I think it's going to be hard to require everybody of a mask unless we are willing to provide masks for everyone, which will be challenging again because the supply isn't there, but the demand is.
Thank you, Grace. Jennifer?
I see CD, Tara said CD has guidelines to many of these questions, so very good. Thank you for that suggestion. I know the guidelines from CDE are one thing, what districts adopt to fit their needs is another, so definitely consider both of those. Cassandra mentioned at MUS, the superintendent is on the multidisciplinary task force and inform the teachers union that our school will develop our own task force recovery work group once the county guidelines have been established. Nurses will be included in our district in the discussions to reopen. So yes, as Kirsten said, there is a big task force that is putting forth these recommendations, and then those recommendations will be taken to each district superintendent, and they will create their own task force. And thank you for that, Cassandra, that will work on their unique situation within their district. These from Lisa, these early education, child education guidelines from LA County are appropriate and helpful for moderate to severe students. And she gave a link there. That's wonderful. Thank you for that. And then Dawn mentioned NASN has some great guidance. And then there's some further links here. And what I will do for all of you once we're finished is I will copy our chat and send it back out to all of you, so you will have all of these links. So don't worry about having to write all this information down. I will send it back to you after we're finished here today. Grace also said, Julie, I should have specified that cloth masks are going to be recommended for staff and students if no restrictions to continue social distancing. If we have to social distance, the mask recommendation may change. And then they're considering, Sarah's considering outdoor spaces for the first aid medical admin site, always with student privacy as a concern. Face shields are an idea for deaf and hard of hearing. Yes, that would be fantastic if we could do that. And we have a question from Fulton. Does anyone have recommendations for non-contact thermometers that are accurate? Does anyone have any recommendations on that?
Excuse me, these are also referred to as infrared thermometers.
Thank you.
I've used them and I've been very happy with them. I had looked up the specific brands that I've used in the past and couldn't find those brands. So I don't know from brand to brand if they're all accurate, but I have used them in the past and have been very happy with them and with how accurate they are.
Great, thank you. Just to finish here, I know we're getting close to our time, Debbie, of finishing up at 2:30. We have 3 new messages. We're talking about, I'm just going to summarize the last few messages and then we'll move on to our next slide. It would be difficult to have a sick room in her 2 school sites, Kim's school sites, because they have a very small health office. Outside idea is a great idea. They love the LA resource. Thank you. Infrared thermometers are not always accurate if the environment's cold. Someone had mentioned liking the Braun 2-in-1. It does not touch. So I think we've gotten through most of those questions. I'd like to just quickly move on to our final 2 slides, if that's okay with you, Debbie.
Yes, I think you and I both knew this would be the longest slide.
Yes. So this next slide, I know we have alluded to already, but the fall and COVID-19 healthcare procedures. So as I think what I will do is just summarize, as Kirsten has said today, and myself and Debbie, there are guidelines that will be sent forth from CDE as we have been receiving, since our closure in March, and those are being updated regularly. There are weekly webinars on CDE, which if you can look on their website, and they're actually pretty excellent. They're about an hour long. They're usually on Thursdays, and there's various topics. And it just talks about what we're going through right now and how to support all of our students. As far as the fall goes, that large task force that Kirsten, spoke about will eventually come into a smaller task force, as Cassandra had mentioned, at each local district, and then that will include the nurses into that task force from what was just shared, and I believe that's hopefully going to happen for all of your districts, that you will be included in that planning for the fall. So as all of you know, this is something that is evolving so quickly, and it's hard to keep a pulse on all of the changes. But your input today will be shared and is highly respected by all of us, and definitely we need to consider all of these things as we prepare for our fall and into our fall, for that matter, because this is not going away quick enough, and I think it's going to continue. Debbie, would you like to share?
Yes, I just want to add that these questions are so valuable for the planning, for the work groups and all the task force as they're, discussing the plan forward. So please, if there's something that you didn't think about asking today, we strongly encourage you to send emails to your administration. Feel free to send any questions to us. And also, I know public health is a great resource as well. So the questions that you have very likely may be something that nobody thought of. So please send any questions.
And I'm seeing, Debbie, I'm seeing from Linda to share the resource. So my resource for those webinars with CDE is when you go on to CDE's website, there is a distance learning link, and within that distance learning link are lists of webinars, and I believe there's a area where you can just register for their webinars, and then they send you information the day prior. We're having this webinar on moderate to severe students with disabilities or transition or whatnot. And you can register, and then you receive their notices of the webinars coming. So it's the distance learning link on the CDE website. And then we did have a question, Debbie, about having another one of these before school starts in the fall. I would be definitely willing to plan something for maybe very early August, so that we are all maybe feeling a little more supported at that time. And if there are further questions that haven't been discovered within the next month, maybe we can pose those out to our districts as well.
And also at that point, there'll be much more direction. So it'll be a perfect time to, you know, clarify some of the plans forward for everybody. So I think that's a great idea. And with the Zoom, if we do it Zoom, then, you know, it's a great venue, great opportunity. So
yes, absolutely. All right, I'm going to move on to our last slide, which is a thank you. And Debbie and I and our committee just want to thank you all for really giving your time. And we know that this is not easy. We know that you're in a profession that is very fragile right now, because you yourselves can receive this illness by working with others. And we are just so incredibly grateful to you for your wonderful thoughts and preparation for the fall and thoughts for now. Everything that you've shared today, it's just really gonna help us prepare for the future with our children.
So, and I just want to add to that, thank you for all of your support. It's been very heartwarming, all of your support to your students, the staff, and you know, I know that you provide some great insight to everybody. So thank you for your support, the community, everything. And then also, Jennifer and I would like to thank the committee, and Lori Brummett, thank you very much for being on the committee. Jeanette Porter, thank you. Joyce Rara, Linda Furness, and Liz Christian, thank you so much for being on the committee to put this on. Thank you.
And again, with that, I will be sharing out the chat today, so you will receive this chat back. If for some chance you do not, please email the SELPA where you registered if you do not receive the chat questions back, and we will make sure you get it. Sometimes we have an incorrect email.
Great to have the Ventura nurses.
Yes. Thank you, Ventura nurses. And we had some from North. So thank you for the thank yous, and thank you to my wonderful co-host, Debbie Geiger. It's been a pleasure to work with you, Debbie. And we wish you all a wonderful summer. It's almost over for this school year, and hopefully you will all get a much deserved break and rest and come back rejuvenated for the fall. And we will keep in touch with you regarding our next meeting. Thank you so much. All right. And we'll stay on for 1 minute, and then I will end our chat.
Thank you, Jennifer and Deborah. You guys did a great job.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lori, for all your insight.
Yes. Great feedback. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
You too.
Thanks.
Okay, Debbie, I am saving the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Kirsten.
It is saved. Thank you, Kirsten. Oh, you're muted, dear. There she is.
You're welcome.
It's great to have you here.
Well, I learned a lot. It's really, you know, just such an important, knowledgeable group, and some really, really good insights. Yeah.
So I've saved the chat. I will share it with all of you.
And Jennifer, just so you know, the questions that were presented with public health, yes. I typed them all up and I was typing their answers to them.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Thank you.
I'll send that on as well.
Great. Okay, I'm going to stop the share now. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.